Hey guys, sorry I've been gone for a while. I got stung by a bee. Around a decade ago, you couldn't escape horror Let's Plays on YouTube. Whether it was PewDiePie screaming at Amnesia, Markiplier screaming at Five Nights at Freddy's, or everybody and their mother screaming at Slender, Outlast, being a survival horror game somewhat similar to the games I just mentioned, exploded in popularity, being played by almost every major content creator, and was highly praised for helping popularize a new approach to horror. Now, the first Outlast game is just over a decade old and is considered by many as one of the most influential horror games of the last decade. But does it still hold up? And is it actually scary? That's what I'm going to figure out, because in this video, I'm going to explain the different aspects of Outlast 1, what I like, what I don't like, what red barrels can improve, and see if Outlast 1 is actually scary. And guys, just remember that this is just my opinion, so please don't chop off my fingers. Oh, and spoiler warning, I'm gonna be spoiling a decent amount of the game's story, so if you want to play this game, go and do that before watching this video. And also, I'm gonna try sugarcoating certain words and phrases that aren't sound for YouTube, so keep that in mind. Alright, since that's out of the way, let's get into Outlast 1, starting with... In Outlast, you play as Miles Upshur, an investigative journalist who received an email from a whistleblower about horrible things taking place at Mount Massive Asylum. Mount Massive Asylum. Real creative there. After MK Ultra experiments took place in the asylum, leading to the building's closure, the building was purchased by the Murkoff Corporation, and the email you received states that inhumane experiments are taking place in the asylum that must be exposed. You enter the asylum armed with nothing but a digital camera and some batteries, hoping that this is the big break you've been waiting for. As you enter the asylum via some parkour, you quickly realize the terrible mistake you've made, and that you're not leaving this place as the same person you were before. You're told by an unaliving Murkoff soldier that you need to get the frick out of this terrible place. Well, you should have taken your own advice, buddy. This is when you receive the mission objective for the rest of the game: escape, and are promptly chased by this bloated monstrosity, Chris Walker, and he throws you down at least 1 or 2 stories, which you simply tank. Stuff like this happens a lot in this game, and makes me wonder how this guy's legs and ribs aren't completely cooked, but I guess we need a game to play. You then meet Father Martin, one of the only friendly faces in this entire game. I say friendly because he doesn't try killing you. He does prevent your escape in the beginning of the game by drugging you, but this is friendly behavior compared to most other NPCs. After some running and hiding from Chris Walker and some patience, shenanigans in a sewer, and plenty of jump scares, you are eventually caught by the Doctor, who in my opinion is the best villain in this game because of his twisted personality and interesting character design. The Doctor straps you to a chair and cuts off 2 of your fingers, which is one of my favorite moments in this game, as it's a very difficult scene to watch while also being hard to take your eyes off what's happening. I love when horror media can engage the viewer in this way, as it makes for a great spook that has a lasting impact on the viewer. For the rest of the game, your 2 missing fingers act as a constant reminder of the torture the Doctor put you through, because this isn't Resident Evil 7, where you dump the magic liquid and reattach your hand, and this also gives you a greater sense of urgency when escaping the asylum, which is really great. After you escape from the Doctor and watch his death by elevator, you briefly talk to Father Martin, who arranges a meeting with you. After all this happens, you go and take a nice stroll outside to clear your mind and meet up with Father Martin. But first, you're met with another villain, the Wall Rider. You briefly met the Wall Rider in the sewers before, and the documents you picked up along with Father Martin's dialogue alluded to his existence, and the Wall Rider is seen as God to many of the patients in the asylum. On your way to find Father Martin, you eventually reach a theater and receive some sweet plot exposition. Long story short, the asylum is trying to use their patients to create these human super soldiers, essentially beings that have nanotechnology in their brains, allowing them to be controlled remotely, but their trials involving these fellows are unsuccessful, besides one trial. These are some of the inhumane experiments that the whistleblower referred to in the email at the beginning of the game, known as Project Walrider. Basically, Project Walrider are these therapy sessions with the morphogenic engine that involved harming random patients but failed, creating these guys instead. Crazy how it didn't work. After you go and do your thing, briefly lose and retrieve your camera, you find Father Martin nailed to a cross with some of his followers around him. Father Martin then glazes the wall rider before he eventually burns alive on the cross. He didn't have to do this. We could have escaped together, and this was probably a sacrifice to the wall rider and occurred because the documents claimed that Father Martin is schizoaffective, but if I was there in real life, I could have definitely talked him out of it because I have my charisma points maxed out. After Father Martin's unaliving, you make your way to the underground lab in the asylum after being chased by Chris Walker, in which you take a pretty lengthy elevator ride. You explore the lab for a little bit until you're eventually confronted by the wall rider. So you book it like you normally would, but as you're running, Chris pulls up on you and wants to run the fade. It's beyond me how this guy managed to make his way down here or in the sewers. I guess it's just a testament to how dedicated he is to unaliving you for whatever reason. Chris picks you up like a piece of paper and is about to unalive you, but then the wall rider swoops in and swiftly unalives Chris, which was really nice of the wall rider. I owe my life to them. You do some more brief exploring and run into this very wrinkly man in a wheelchair. His name is Dr.
Wernicke.
Anyways, you learned a little bit about this guy in the movie you watched and a document you find earlier in the game, which stated that he was dead. But surprisingly, here he is, alive and kicking. Dr.
Wernicke
informs you that you need to pull the plug on this guy, Billy, whose existence is alluded to in the first document that you pick up, and is in this hamster ball hooked up to this giant machine called a morphogenic engine. It is assumed that Billy is the host of the wall rider, and killing Billy will subsequently kill the wall rider. You eventually pull the plug on Billy, which pisses the wall rider off so much that he throws you around like a rag doll, and then comes inside of you. Pause. Enters your body. Pause. I don't know how to explain it without it sounding sus, but you become the new host of the wall rider. I guess I returned the favor from earlier. After all you've endured up to this point, you're banged up pretty bad, and you start absolutely tweaking as the wall rider messes with your vision as you limp over to the exit, which is a really slow and suspenseful moment which has you on the edge of your seat, nervously anticipating how the game is going to end. This feeling of anticipation is quickly thrown out the window as you open a door and are met with a bunch of Murkoff Corps soldiers that swiftly gun you down, releasing the wall rider from you, who promptly kills the Murkoff soldiers and the game ends. Did all of that make sense? I hope so, because that was a pretty bare bones synopsis of the story in Outlast 1. I'm just gonna get this out of the way, and I know that this is a grass is green take, but I am not a fan of the ending at all. The fact that you are killed in the end, just as you're about to escape, makes your entire journey through the lab and asylum completely pointless, as everything you recorded and the documents you picked up pretty much perish alongside you. I think it would be really cool to see what would have happened if you escaped as the host of the wall rider. I imagine something similar to that one Five Nights at Freddy's cutscene would have played out. Get out! But yeah, the ending is disappointing to say the least, but the rest of the story is really interesting.
Oh, get away from me! God, no! You're not getting me! No!
I enjoyed a lot of the set pieces, like the doctor near the middle of the game, Father Martin's death, losing the camera, the wall rider killing Chris and taking you as the host are all really cool, and they keep the story from losing its steam, keeping you eager to explore. The two settings in the game, being the asylum and the lab, are really solid. The asylum is exactly what you expect. Just a huge rundown building with these messed up looking patients lurking around every corner, which can definitely add to the atmosphere and make the game very spooky at times. The other setting, being the lab, is a nice, bright, and organized contrast from the dark and gritty asylum, and I enjoyed most of my time in the lab, even though it was pretty short-lived and definitely not as scary as the rest of the asylum for obvious reasons. Well, that's the story and setting of Outlast, and both aspects are for the most part pretty solid considering the content of the game. And I briefly mentioned these documents when talking about the wall rider and Billy, and these documents are really cool. They're really short reads and give you extra tidbits of lore that really help build the world of Outlast, and there are a bunch scattered around the asylum that really flesh out the story, like the documents regarding Chris Walker, Project Wall Rider, Billy, the Murkoff Corporation and employees, and there are even documents regarding MK Ultra, which is all interesting stuff that fulfills the purpose of fleshing out the horrors of the asylum. They are really cool, and I'll touch on them a little more in the gameplay section, but overall, the story to Outlast 1 is really solid, and although the story was a little hard to follow on my first playthrough, I understood the story a lot more on my second playthrough, and with the help of forum discussion posts to help put this segment together. I really enjoyed the story of Outlast, and the world building that was done with the documents and NPCs really complement the game's story. The only real complaint is with the ending, as I find the ending to be pretty lazy, as a lot more could have been done with it. However, the story of Outlast is really solid, but what good is a story without some cool characters? In the story section, the three antagonists that I mentioned are the Doctor, Chris Walker, and the Wall Rider, who all chase you around the asylum and are supposed to provide a majority of the scares. There are also some patients during some sections of the game that chase you around, and these guys for the most part are just fine. Nothing special by any means, as their character designs aren't too frightening to me, just typical body horror, but I can overlook it because the remarks that they can make can be pretty unsettling while they observe or chase you. Like these two guys, for example, who calmly talk about unaliving you, which is rather unsettling.
I would like to kill him. As would I.
The patients aren't really treated like main antagonists like Chris or the Wall Rider, just made to provide some scares when the main antagonists aren't around, so it's not a big deal that these guys can be a little boring at times because they aren't dedicated to super long portions of the game. For the main antagonists, let's start with the Doctor. The scenes with the Doctor are easily the highlights of the game to me.
Hear me out.
And I really wish we got to see more of him in the base game. The Doctor completely steals the show in the short amount of time he has, and his character works so well, not only because he easily has the best character design out of the main antagonists, but also because he's the only character that really left a lasting impact on my playthroughs. This is achieved because of the psychological horror aspects that this character possesses, like when he taunts you with freedom as he wheels you into his office, which this, along with the setting, immediately alerts the player that you aren't here for your yearly physical. When you take the elevator up and are met with him for the first time, he perfectly encapsulates this crazy Doctor as he wheels you into his office while making small talk, taunting you, and observing how horrified his other patients were from his mere presence, which makes this moment very unsettling and incredibly suspenseful. His small talk signals that there is somehow a smidgen of reality left somewhere in there, like when he acts friendly just so he can lure you into being treated, which is made even scarier considering what he does to you and the patients of the asylum. The scene where he cuts off your fingers is easily the most memorable part of the game for me, as it's very hard to watch, yet still incredibly engaging in a twisted way. Also, I really enjoyed the part right before you meet the Doctor, as you walk through a medical room with unalived people and meat all over the place, and get chased around by two inmates, which was really tense with the eerie music in the background, and the patient screaming random phrases at you like, "I want my money! I want my money!" and "Death and taxes!" I loved the moments with the Doctor. His inclusion was great. Too bad it was only for like 20 minutes near the middle of the game, as the other antagonists pale in comparison. Chris Walker and the Wall Rider are not very scary to me. I'll start with the Wall Rider because I definitely like him more than Chris Walker. I don't think there's a definitive answer as to what the Wall Rider is. I and many others have tried to make sense of the Wall Rider, but here's what the Outlast wiki has to say. While appearing ghostly in nature, the Wall Rider is actually a swarm of nanites, small nanoscopic machines which collectively possess great strength and power. It is unclear if William Billy Hope simply learned how to control the swarm, or if he is the first patient to fully manifest the Wall Rider. Now, it doesn't make sense to me how the Wall Rider goes into you after Billy is clearly killed, and how it kills the Murkoff soldiers afterwards, but I don't know. I might just have Chris Walker's intelligence. The design of the Wall Rider resembles a supernatural being, despite being made of hundreds of nanobots, which doesn't scare me all too much. He's basically a silhouette, which isn't anything special. It's just kinda meh. What I do really like about the Wall Rider though, is how he can't be seen unless you utilize your night vision camera, which makes his encounters that much more frantic because you can't see him without the camera. Overall, I'm not a huge fan of the Wall Rider, and he is not even close to as scary as the Doctor. Now, a character that doesn't even hold a candle to the Doctor is Chris Walker. If I'll give anything to Chris Walker, it's that his character's lore is pretty freaky. Chris was a Vietnam War veteran who was admitted to Mount Massive Asylum on account of what he saw in the war, causing an extreme drop in his intelligence, and Project Wall Rider caused him to harm himself, so he looks like this now. Chris isn't too scary to me, mainly because his character design isn't super creative. just being a rather large fellow with spiky teeth who just basically looks like the boss of the inmates. More intimidating than actually scary. Don't get me wrong, there are parts where he can be a little scary, especially when you have to run away from him. But he is pretty slow, and he can't fit through gaps, which can make him a pushover at times. But he will rip your head off if you get too close to him. There is another reason as to why his character isn't too scary, which I'll touch on in the next section, but overall, there is one character that I find truly terrifying, being the Doctor, and two characters that can be scary at times, but they don't leave me with the same impact that the Doctor does. Outlast is held in high regard by many as one of the most influential horror games alongside the Amnesia series, the Silent Hill series, and Alien Isolation, and helped popularize the horror games where your only way to survive is to run and hide. Yeah, in Outlast, you play as a little soy boy with a night vision camera who can't defend himself against the Sigma patients, so you need to run and hide to maintain survival. The game literally tells you before you play that you are defenseless, and your only chance of survival is to run and hide. Does running and hiding make the game scary and fun to play? Well, I want to say this. To me, the amount of fun I have playing a horror game is dictated by how scary the game is. To me, if a horror game isn't scary, it is not fun to play, plain and simple. On my first playthrough, I played the game on normal mode, which I found made the game too easy and not all too scary for 3 reasons. The main reason being that I had an abundance of batteries. In this game, your camera is your best friend, and you don't go anywhere without it, and it helps you see in the dark by granting you night vision. Using night vision eats through your batteries, so you gotta conserve them and only use it when necessary, which is what I would say if you weren't able to hold 10 batteries at a time. And batteries are found pretty frequently throughout the asylum. This made playing the game on normal mode very easy and not scary for me, as I was able to hide behind the comfort of infinite night vision, but I can only blame myself for picking the easiest difficulty to play on. That's why I decided to give the game a proper go and play on nightmare mode for my second playthrough to try and get the most out of this game. The only real difference that I noticed between the normal and nightmare modes only changed how I used my camera, which I did really like. Also, characters can unalive you in 2 hits, and some can unalive you in 1 hit, like Chris and the Wall Rider, but this didn't change much for me, and only made the game a little more rage-inducing, but that's what's to be expected when playing on the second hardest difficulty. In Nightmare mode, you can only hold up to 2 batteries, and using night vision eats through your batteries like an OG Game Boy, so I used my camera much more sparingly, which definitely helped the game become more spooky. But the problems I noticed when playing on normal mode were still pretty apparent on nightmare mode. There were 2 main problems that I noticed, the first being made clear right at the beginning of the game, and that's the hiding system, as it is way too safe, even on nightmare mode. In the beginning of the game, you need to hide in a locker from Chris after Father Martin turns the power off in the asylum. There are only 2 lockers to hide in, and Chris only opens one of the lockers before deciding that there's nothing else in the room to inspect. I guess this is in character for him, because the document you find in the beginning of the game tells you that Chris isn't the brightest bulb, but imagine how frightening it could have been if before Chris leaves, he slowly walks back towards the locker you're hiding in, opens it, and throws you out of the room where you frantically run into the basement to turn the generator on. Something like this could have really set the tone for the rest of the game and make hiding appear less safe than it actually is, which could cause significantly more tension when hiding. This moment really killed a lot of potential fear that I could have had while playing, as all the suspense and tension is lost when I hide under a bed or inside a locker because I know that enemies will never check the spot I'm hiding in, especially during the moments where I had to start the generator, collect the fuses, or collect elevator keys. Never felt as frantic as they should have because I was able to hide without any fear of being found. I feel like if the devs made it so that the antagonists can occasionally get lucky and check the spot you're hiding in and find you, would make the game much more frantic and make hiding feel a lot more suspenseful. My second main issue with the game is the game's lack of psychological horror and over-reliance on jump scares.
God damn it, holy shit!
Jump scares are not scary. Sure, they may scare the player momentarily, but don't leave a lasting impact on the player like psychological horror does. It gets to a certain point towards the end of the game where the jump scares become an annoyance rather than something that keeps the player on their toes, and I was just staring blankly at my screen waiting forward to progress. I would have preferred the use of more psychological horror because the moments where it is utilized, like the scenes with the doctor, inmate remarks at you, or the horrifying information found in the documents are amazing and left a lasting impression on me, unlike the jump scare fest that a large portion of the game is. Don't get me wrong, I don't think that jump scares are downright terrible. When jump scares are paired with suspense and used in moderation, I think they could be a powerful tool that reminds the player not to get too comfortable, but when used too much, really take a lot of the scare factor out of the game for me. There are some positives to the gameplay. Like I said before, I believe that the camera system really helps give Outlast its own identity to set it apart from other horror games, and playing on Nightmare mode really made the game more tense because I had to use my camera much more sparingly. There are also a decent amount of really tense and suspenseful moments, like the scene I mentioned before when you meet the doctor and are chased by two inmates that scream at you, and this moment is really tense and frantic. Being chased by the wall rider in the lab, and being chased by patients after you grab your camera are similar moments that are incredibly tense and adrenaline inducing, and make up a lot of the most memorable moments of the game for me. I also like this part where you hang across a ledge and these guys again. But when you hang across this ledge and they have their typical conversation about unaliving you but say, "Just wait a moment," and go silent. It's a pretty freaky moment. Also, this quick moment when you're on your way to the showers with Chris is a nice set piece where he bursts through the airlock and something explodes, leaving you plummeting to your demise, but your fall is cushioned by a pile of meat. Briefly losing your camera was also a great set piece, which makes that section of the game very suspenseful, as your camera, and the ability to hide, was one of your only senses of security, and it being briefly taken from you was a great decision. I loved watching the camera slowly slide down the broken ledge and then falling into the abyss waiting to be retrieved, as it instilled a unique sense of dread that wasn't matched at any other point in the game. There is also the documents and notes. I'll talk about notes first because they are fairly simple. Notes are just key moments that occur in the game that you're supposed to record, and when you record a key moment, a little icon appears in the bottom right corner of your screen, and when you enter the game's menu, it gives you a brief recap of what you just recorded. Some are more obvious to record, like Father Martin's death, and some are more obscure, like this dude ripping another guy's head off, and there are 31 notes in total. I think that notes are a cool concept, but I wish a little more was done with them. Like, I think it would be cool to watch a compilation of all the video notes we recorded while the credits rolled or something. There are also documents, which are found in spots around the asylum, which I like a lot. Not only because they give you nice lore tidbits, but because they encourage you to explore the asylum more, and help sell the abandoned asylum atmosphere with all these documents being scattered around that build the world up. Some are easier to find, and some are more difficult, with another total of 31 documents to find. Good stuff. Another positive that I have is that progressing through the game is very seamless for the most part. I rarely ever got lost, or needed guidance on where to go, or needed to see where objects were to progress through the game, as progression is very linear and the game makes it very clear where to go, either with red sauce or with lighting. The only part I struggled with progressing was the objective, find Father Martin. When you go outside to take a stroll and you're chased by Chris Walker, I found it somewhat difficult to navigate because the area is pitch black, and using your night vision doesn't help a whole lot, but that's because I barely had any batteries during this section, which is why I'm looking at the floor in most of these clips. Overall, there are aspects of the gameplay that I enjoy, specifically how linear progression is, how adrenaline-inducing parts of the game can be when you're chased, some of the set pieces, the use of the camera, notes, and documents are great and make Outlast a scary experience at times, but the game's over-reliance on jump scares and overly safe hiding system can take away a lot of the scare factor for me. That's not to say that this is a bad game by any means. There's a lot more that I like to Outlast than I dislike, which will be reflected in my score. And the amount of care and calculation that went into building the world of Outlast is very evident, but there are horror games that I find much scarier than this, but I did enjoy a lot of aspects of the game. Outlast was a mixed bag for me. On one hand, I can praise this game for being super influential, having unique aspects of gameplay, an interesting story, and for being a clear and concise linear experience. On the other hand, the game's over-reliance on jump scares, flawed hiding system, and lame villains take a lot of the scare factor out of the game for me, and had me wishing for a more nuanced psychological approach to horror similar to what was done with The Doctor. Overall, I think that Outlast is a perfectly fine horror game, albeit a little shallow with its approach to horror. I have no doubt that a majority of horror fans will enjoy Outlast for what it is, and for a first attempt at a horror game, Red Barrels could do much worse than this, but we also know that they are capable of much better. Thank you for watching, and goodbye.